Greetings again, friends. Another beautiful day outside here, and just kind of like doing these outside on occasion just to give a different perspective. And thinking about perspective, and even in the last video, boy, those birds are really pretty. I wish you could see them. I just saw a flock flying by and this big, huge bird. But perspective. Think about being a bird and looking down and what you can see. And think about the planes, as I was just getting ready to say. You know, last time I was videoing, I had a couple of planes when I was talking about faith and tragedy and faith having an object, and you heard that plane on the video because I'm outside and I could see it here. You couldn't see it, I could see it, but have you ever been up in a plane? When you're up in a plane, you can look down and you can get a perspective of what happens. Now we have limited sight. The way we are, because we're limited bodily to a place in space, we have limited perspective when we look at things through our own natural eyes. But you can have a greater perspective when you go through things, because you can learn from what you go through, learn from tragedy or other things, and you can help other people to go through those same things because you have a perspective of going through it. Now, as I was going through tragedy, even in the middle of it, I was writing a lot, and one of the blogs I wrote is called Perspective. And this was actually around Earth Day in 2008, and I addressed that. So appropriate that I'm outside again, because I can talk about creation a little bit and you can enjoy the scenery behind me. But I want to address something that maybe you hadn't thought about quite like this, or maybe you need to think about more to get a better perspective. So this was written on 4/26/08. Are you an optimist, a pessimist, or might you call yourself a realist? Whatever you see yourself as being has a lot to do with your success in life and your relationship with others. The way that your life goes largely depends upon your perspective. However, you cannot control many of the things that happen in your life. The recent emphasis on Earth Day, as I mentioned, should remind us of this simple truth. We do have some impact on our local environment, but many things are just beyond our ability to control. For instance, say, you know, we talk about, I guess this was part of the discussion at this time, where people were emphasizing how we can protect the planet, and you should be a responsible steward of your environment and what's around, but it can get too far in that, I think, and you should enjoy the creation and take care of it, but you know that it can get crazy when you say that man causes all of the global warming or climate change, as we say now. And what about a volcano? That's a natural thing that occurs, and tons of ash and dust go up in the sky and cause all that pollution and dust into the atmosphere. It even affects the temperatures around the globe when something large like this happens. I mean, some things are out of our control. So I addressed this here and kind of played off on that here. But the point of this blog is what I say here at the end of this: when some things are beyond our ability to control, we need perspective. So think with me on perspective. Now, for example, we cannot influence the jet stream winds. The jet stream winds are there, and they steer the forces that control our climate. And the weather affects all of us. We cannot make it rain or not rain. You know, people have done studies to try to do this and seed clouds, but God controls the rain. He makes the vapors go up from the waters through the sun, heating them, and it makes them ascend up into heavens, and the water cycle that exists. He makes it rain the way that He does with the winds that carry air masses to different places, and so God controls that, and we can predict it some, but not very effectively. It's nice when we have nice, beautiful days like this, where high pressure is helping to clear from any rain or anything, and we can enjoy the creation out without getting all wet. But the rain is necessary and part of the cycle. But we can't make it rain or not rain, but we're all dependent upon water. I mean, that makes the difference in this planet. What is it, 70% water? Our bodies are that or more, and it's the difference in what you see all in space. And they search for water out there and wonder if it's there. Think it may have been there on Mars or someplace, but water is what makes the difference on this planet, and we depend on it too. And that's where life exists more around the water. And I'm around a little body of water here today as I'm talking to you. But we're dependent upon water. We cannot make the sun shine less or brighter, and we're dependent upon sunlight. You know, we talk about the sun and the nuclear fission that exists in the process that generates the sun's energy and radiation, and sunspots can affect your technology if it goes into our atmosphere, and God's put this great protective atmosphere around us in order to help block off or deflect the radiation from the sun, or else we'd be fried and the water would all dry up. But God protects our planet, and it's a privileged planet we live on. But we can't affect the sun. We're dependent upon it, and our plants are dependent upon it to have the photosynthesis process to grow so we can have food to eat, and so we're dependent upon sunlight. We cannot affect the stars in the sky, and we often do not even pay attention to them. You know, I've talked about and written about this too. You know, if you live in a city, then you might get kind of crazy, because you can go your whole life in a city and just see what man produces in what they do on television and videos and news. And you, in a city, have so many people together that you don't have as many plants and things growing and nature. And you have so many lights in a city that you often don't see the stars in the sky. And people don't even pay attention to them as much in a city. And you don't get out into the country and see the variety in nature as much, or even the bodies of water in a city. So if you just stay in a city, your perspective kind of gets more on men. And that's why I think some of the cities get kind of more susceptible to dependence upon government, and then more liberal in that respect, and then more of a chance to riot. I'm getting off track a little bit, but this is an important perspective to have. You know, it makes a difference where you live, and it gives you a different perspective. But people don't even often pay attention to the stars in the sky. But they're there, and they're amazing. We can't control any of the stars, and we can't control the heart of another person, because they're an individual, but we can have an impact on other people. We need perspective, and that's what I write about here. All right, now I addressed something here. I said, have you ever read the Bible book of Job? Now, you ought to read that book. It's helped so many people through the years and the centuries to get a different perspective on the tragedy they face. But in the Bible book of Job, you can see, among many lessons there, the importance of perspective. Yes, I encourage you to read this book, and particularly Job chapters 38 to 42. Now, if you know about Job 38 to 42, that is the longest portion in the Bible of God's direct word, where he speaks directly to Job in those chapters, and he basically just asks him a lot of questions about what he can control or not, as I've sort of laid out here a little bit. So read that book and read those chapters to get God's perspective and a record of what he said to Job, who had gone through so many trials from nature, from people close to him, and even personally. And of course, if you understand that story in the book and the account of what happened there, it was directed by what God had allowed Satan to do to test Job and to try him, and attacked his family and caused the tragedies that occurred there, and it teaches you a lot about what goes on in the unseen world. But a lot of lessons to learn from that. And I say here, running from your trials will not deliver you from them. Now, this is an important point here. Running from them doesn't help you. Attacking your trials or attacking those who bring them to you will not accomplish what God intends to teach you through them. You must trust God and His Word no matter what. And this is what I had said to my children on 4/21/07, just before the intense trials began to come on me, when God tested me by that, whether I was going to trust Him and His Word, and allowed the devil to do a lot of things to impact me. You'll have to get the book to see more about that. But if you want to do that, you can have His perspective and live through the trials in your life. Not just try to avoid them, not attack them or the people that might bring them to you, but to endure through them and learn what God is trying to teach you through them, and even the blessings He wants to bring through them. So only then, when you go through something and endure through it, will you learn to be able to handle whatever happens in life. And friend, that's what enabled me to be able to go through losing so many things. I mean, losing my family, my friends, losing my position, losing my finances. I mean, I lost so much, and yet I was able to endure through that because of my faith. So I write about this here, and I said, what perspective, in talking about the Virginia Tech tragedy, which is what was the catalyst bringing about all the tragedy in my life, what perspective do you think Sung-Hui Cho had then? And he's the one who was the shooter of that, what was the worst massacre in U.S. history. Now, sadly, there have been more massacres since then that have caused more deaths and damage, but it still remains the largest school massacre, or educational institution massacre. And Sung-Hui Cho was the one who did that, and his thinking was not in line with reality or God's created order. And so he turned to his own way of thinking. He put out a manifesto. The news talked about that, and you could look that up still and see that online. But I said, this, of course, was motivated by the enemy of us all. And the enemy of us all is the devil. Same one who impacted Job, and God allowed that to happen to Job. Now, Sung-Hui Cho first tried to withdraw from his problems, and you can see this in looking at what happened to him. Then he tried to blame and attack others, and he ultimately did. And he sent 32 people, and then himself to death. He sent them into eternity and impacted countless other lives through his horrible attack. Sung-Hui Cho needed God's perspective. He needed to fear God above all. And that's the first in my top 10 lessons to learn. And I said we needed to do more to help him have this perspective. The people around him could have done more to help him to get a different perspective so he wouldn't turn inward and then attack outward. And we need to do more to help other people have God's perspective, especially if we help to hope present such a tragedy as occurred then and has since. And even with this rioting and stuff that's happening, people need to get God's perspective and His means of justice and law and order that He's established, and even the blessing of that we have some in this country. So you can see more of all of what I mean here, and what I've written on my website and what I'm talking about here. And even related to this, you can see more in the poem that I wrote as I was in the chapel on the Virginia Tech campus and wrote this poem called Learn to Prevail, 32 to 33. And you can see that on my website, vtlessonstolearn.com. And I was just led to write that on that first anniversary of the tragedy that happened on 4/16. It was 4/16/08 that I wrote that poem. But friend, I want you to get perspective, and I know you need perspective. You need to get out. You don't need to withdraw and hide. And even in this coronavirus stuff, you don't need to just stay inside and hide and just listen and watch what people do to cause you to be afraid, and all the ways you can kind of get and build on things. And boy, I've got another blog I wrote called Creating Fear. I might get to that in here shortly with another blog. But I hope you get perspective, and I hope this blog will help you to get perspective and ask yourself, are you optimist? Are you a pessimist? Do you consider yourself a realist? I kind of consider myself an optimistic realist because that gives me hope. And I think that's the best perspective for you to have, philosophically speaking. But I hope you liked this video today and enjoyed the scenery with me today. And I hope you'll subscribe to my channel, share it with other people, hit the notification bell so you'll know when I release another one, and leave any comments below. Be glad to hear from you and address anything else you'd like me to talk about.